You went through another big bang in popularity among science fiction fans when Frank Herbert's son, Brian Herbert, came calling with an invitation to resurrect the legendary Dune series, with Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune, which exploded from there into a whole new era for the series. How did that once in a lifetime opportunity first come to be?
Well, so I had already built up a pretty good stack of credits. I mean, I had a dozen New York Times bestsellers, I had awards and award nominations, and I had already been pretty well practiced in working in somebody else's universe. I had done Star Wars and X-Files, and I did some Batman and Superman stuff. And I mean, that's a separate skill to work in somebody else's sandbox. Um, but I was always a huge Dune fan. Dune I read, I think, when I was 10 or 11 years old, and I loved it. Then I read it again at the end of high school, then I read it again in college, and each time you get like a completely different experience out of it. And I was buying all those books. I bought God Emperor of Dune when it came out, and I bought Heretics of Dune when it came out, and I bought Chapter House Dune when it came out. And then Frank Herbert died, and Chapter House Dune just ends on a Luke, I am your father kind of cliffhanger. And I, as a Dune fan, just wanted to know what happened. How would the story end? And then it was like 10 years after Frank Herbert passed away that I finally got up the nerve to just write a letter to Brian Herbert. And I said, I'm this huge Dune fan, and I really want to. No, Frank Herbert's very last published book was a collaboration with his son Brian, and Brian had already published a dozen of his own science fiction books. So I was actually writing him more as a fanboy to say, why aren't you finishing this story? I want to read it. And Brian had been thinking about it, and Brian had been thinking about it and just hadn't kind of gotten up to the critical mass of doing it. But I wrote him this letter, and I had never met him, but everybody in science fiction knows everybody. So I kind of got his address and I sent it in. And I did this whole pitch. I said, look, this really needs to be done. The story has to be finished. And are you going to finish it? Or if you're not going to finish it, could we maybe brainstorm and work on it together? And here's all my credits. And I really think that we should put the end on the story that Frank Herbert intended to. And Brian got my letter and sat on it for like a month. He says that he was doing a security check, asking all my friends about whether I was a halfway decent person to work with or not. And then he just called up kind of a blind phone call and started talking to me. And my wife was in the room, and she says, I've never spoken to him before, ever. And she said, after about 30 seconds, you guys started speaking a different language, that we were finishing each other's sentences, and we were riffing off of these weird connections with The Dragon in the Sea or Eyes of Heisenberg or obscure Frank Herbert books, because I had read all of them. And we immediately figured out that we could work together. And we really wanted to figure out how to tell the last story of Dune, which is Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. But we didn't just do that one first, because it had been, I forget how many, 10 or 12 years since the last Dune book was published. So we needed a way to get people back into Dune and reading the whole universe. And so we did a prequel trilogy instead: House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and House Carino, which is the generation before Dune. It's young Duke Leto and how he meets Lady Jessica, and how Baron Harkonnen becomes their archenemy, and how the planetologist gets assigned to Dune and all that stuff. And we wrote that trilogy, and it was a huge success. And by that time, we had found Frank Herbert's outline for Dune 7. So he had left it in a safe deposit box in a bank in Seattle. So it was like this faded old dot matrix thing with his, here's how the story's all wrapping up. And then we realized, we've got to set up. See, Frank Herbert did a lot of stuff off screen that he would just like jump from between chapters. And after that giant war was over, then we went off to here. And Brian and I kind of like to fill in those blanks because I want to see the giant war that happened. I want to see how the Honored Matres destroy the planet Arrakis and all that kind of stuff. And so we saw that we needed to set up a bunch of things to build into Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. So we wrote a whole super prequel trilogy, 10,000 years before Dune, called the Butlerian Jihad and the Machine Crusade and the Battle of Corran. And that just opened up millions of possibilities. That's still the fan favorite. I think that they love that trilogy the most. And then that all set up for us to write the grand finale. And then we've done a bunch of other things. And there's this little minor movie coming out that you might have heard of. And people will be talking about Dune for a while.
I can tell it brings you a great measure of pride to help resurrect and reinvent that series for a new generation. What were you proudest of creatively among your original contributions to finishing the series, especially getting to work with and expand upon Frank Herbert's original outline for what would have been that 7th book?
Just the fact of writing the end of one of the greatest science fiction series of all time. And we've had lots of fans writing us to say, well, we've read Sandworms of Dune and you could write a sequel to it and carry the story further. And we've just discussed it a lot. And that's where Frank wanted to end it. So we can write more prequels and stuff and fill in 10,000 years of history, but actually I think it's 16,000 years of history. But I think we wanted to cap at the end of Sandworms where Frank Herbert wanted to end it.
These new Dune books became such big hits that you and Brian Herbert just kept expanding and the universe just exploded with new trilogies and spin-off series like the Prelude to Dune trilogy, the Heroes of Dune, the Caladan trilogy, the Legends of Dune, and the Great Schools of Dune, among others, which comprise almost 20 new books in total, counting the Road to Dune companion book. Please reflect back on this massive creative period in your career. It must have been amazing.
Let's see. Well, the Great Schools of Dune was really, we love being able to establish how the Spacing Guild was formed and how the Mentat School and how the Bene Gesserit came close. And of course that the Sisterhood of Dune is kind of forming the springboard for a new TV show that's in development. The other thing though, in that trilogy, we created, in the Butlerian Jihad, we created probably our greatest villain ever is in Erasmus. He's this sadistic, it's a cross between Dr. Mengele and Pinocchio. I mean, he wants to understand humans and he kind of wants to be human and he'll take apart as many humans as he need to so he can understand them. And so he's this nasty, ruthless, but sort of endearing guy. In the Great Schools of Dune, though, we have another really, really scary guy, and it's Manfred Tyranno. He's this head of the Butlerian fanatics, the anti-technology people that just want to destroy everything. And he is just laser focused on he's right, everybody else is wrong. And he's got his mob of fanatics and they deny technology and they'd be the anti-vaxxer movement right now. They'd be the January 6th rioters. They'd be, this is so creepy. And so to get into he was, I don't want to get into it so bad. I mean, he's maimed because somebody planted a bomb under his speaking stage, so he's lost like the lower half of his body. And there are these two researchers that they're about to give him new legs. They've grown new legs for him, and he kills them because that's not what God would want. And it's just this. The guy is so fanatical and so focused, and you can still kind of understand him. There are so many good scenes. I'm thinking of great ones from House Harkonnen. I'm thinking of great ones from the Machine Crusade. And, it's this, Frank Herbert left us this most magnificent universe that there's so much stuff to play in. And, I can't pick one. There's just so much in there that we enjoyed writing. And Brian and I have been doing this for well over 20 years. And we still have these great new ideas. In fact, I finished writing my chapters in the Heir of Caladan, and Brian, I think, has like 7 left to go. And then we start this whole process of editing and going back and forth, and that'll take us quite a while. But we're not running out of ideas yet.